The void was utterly still. Only the hum of plasma coils and the faint rattle of restraints broke the silence inside the transport bay of the Black Talon. The air was stale, recycled so many times it smelled like burnt oil and antiseptic. 30 prisoners sat locked in grav chairs, each sealed in shock manacles, each blindfolded, heads tilted downward as the ship trembled through void turbulence. Sergeant Kalen Vaughn could feel the cold metal biting into his wrists. He could hear the distant hymns playing through the ship's vox, monotonous, mechanical prayers to the Emperor that seemed to drag eternity through each syllable. The Emperor's light guides even the condemned. Intoned the recorded voice of the ship's confessor. Those who have sinned against his will shall find redemption in pain. The words washed over Kalen like rusted blades. Redemption, pain, he'd heard them all before, whispered by officers as they sent men to die in wars no one would remember. His crime was simple. He refused to slaughter unarmed colonists during the cleansing of Jericho Reach. The Commissar called it disobedience. The Inquisitor called it heresy. The Black Talon shuddered as it broke through the asteroid's thin atmosphere. The gravity clamps engaged, pulling every prisoner back into their chairs with a thump that cracked bone. No one screamed, not because they were brave, but because they knew the implants in their necks would punish the sound. A voice came through the vox again, this one mechanical, filtered through static. Arrival in sector perditions more in 72 seconds. Prepare the cargo. The cargo, that's what they called them. Not men, not soldiers. Just numbered property being sent to a hole no one ever escaped. The ship jolted. The engines roared to silence. The faint hiss of the docking clamps followed, and the air grew heavier, colder. Kalen felt his blindfold rip away. Light hit his eyes like knives. He blinked, and the world came into view, if one could call it that. The hangar bay of perditions more stretched before him like the inside of a coffin, the size of a mountain. Black steel arches curved upward into shadow, lined with cogitator banks and servo skulls drifting like pale ghosts. Every surface was engraved with runes of penitence, glowing faintly in crimson. Rows of black-armored guards waited, faces hidden behind featureless helmets. Their armor bore the sigil of the Adeptus Arbites, though modified, fused with Mechanicus tubing and purity seals. They looked more like machines than men. A figure approached from the end of the hall, walking with a mechanical rhythm, a sound like gears grinding with each step. Half human, half construct, the Warden of Perditions more towered over them. Tubes pulsed from his spine, connecting into a metallic collar that fed into his skull. His face was gone, replaced with a polished steel mask shaped like a blank visage, mouth sealed, eyes glowing faint amber. The prisoners bowed their heads instinctively. A servo skull descended beside the warden, projecting a holographic sigil of the Imperial Aquila. Then came the words, spoken in a voice that wasn't human. It echoed like a vox recording playing through broken glass. Silence is devotion, noise is heresy. You will speak when commanded. You will think when permitted. You will die when ordained. The guards moved in, unlocking restraints, yanking prisoners to their feet one by one. The shock manacles stayed on, connected by barbed cables to their collars. Kalen stumbled as they pulled him forward. The floor was slick, as though coated in oil and blood. He glanced down and saw his own reflection in the black metal beneath him. His eyes were hollow, his once shaved scalp now covered with stubble, his armor, stripped long ago, replaced with a rough gray tunic marked with an identification sigil burned into the fabric. Prisoner 7-1189 Vaughn, Heretic, Class C. They were herded toward a narrow hallway where the light dimmed until it became almost total darkness. A faint hum filled the air, the low vibration of machinery embedded deep in the asteroid's heart. A guard shoved him forward. His boots clanged on the iron grate, each step echoing off unseen walls. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Frost formed on their cuffs. Condensation dripped from the ceiling. It smelled of decay and rust, and somewhere far away, Kalen thought he heard something crying, not human, but mechanical, a sound like metal wailing under pressure. At last they reached a circular gate carved with the symbol of the Mechanicus, the Omnissiah's cog and skull. The gate opened like an eye, layers of steel irising apart with a hiss of pressurized air. Beyond it stretched a vertical tunnel descending into darkness, lit only by the faint pulse of red lumen strips spiraling downward. A platform waited, suspended by heavy chains. The guards pushed the prisoners onto it. The chains groaned, then began to lower, carrying them into the depths. The descent took minutes that felt like hours. Wind howled up from below. The light faded to dim crimson, painting everything in blood hues. Kalen looked over the edge. The darkness below had no bottom. Then the platform jolted to a stop. They stood before an iron door that loomed like a mountain. Symbols of purity and skulls were etched across it. Mechanicus glyphs pulsed faintly, cycling through prayers written in binary. The warden's voice came through hidden speakers. "Welcome to Perdition's Maw. You are now the property of the vault. You will not speak unless asked. You will not die without permission." The door opened. The smell hit first, rot, rust, and incense. The hallway ahead was alive with motion, servo arms retracting from the walls, monitoring eyes scanning every prisoner as they stepped through. On either side, cells built of black glass and metal stretched into infinity. Inside them, shadows moved. Some were human, others not quite. A guard struck Kalen across the back with an electrobaton when he slowed. Sparks flared. He gritted his teeth, refused to make a sound. They marched past cells where inmates stared out through reinforced glass. Some were wrapped in cables, suspended like crucified forms. Others lay curled on the floor, twitching as data worms crawled into ports in their skulls. A voice crackled through the prison's Vox grid, repeating the same phrase again and again in different tones, mechanical and distorted. Devotion is silence, silence is faith, faith is service. Kalen tried to speak, just to whisper to the man beside him, but agony lanced through his neck implant. He bit down hard, jaw trembling, tasting blood. They reached a final checkpoint, a tall, narrow archway filled with scanning beams. One by one, prisoners stepped through. When Kalen's turn came, the beams flared brighter, pulsing red. The machine's voice droned. Subject 7-1189 Vaughn. Faith index low. Punishment recommended. Auditory deprivation. A cold hand grabbed the back of his head. Before he could resist, a steel syringe plunged into the base of his skull. He screamed, not out loud, but inside, his body convulsing as fire burned through his veins. Then everything went silent. Not quiet, silent. He couldn't hear his heartbeat, couldn't hear his breath. The world vanished into absolute void. He looked around in panic. The guards were moving, mouths issuing commands, but no sound reached him. It was as if the universe had been muted. They dragged him down another hall. He stumbled, half blind and deaf, until they threw him into a cell. The door slammed shut behind him with a heavy vibration he could feel but not hear. The room was small, 4 meters by 4, all black metal and blinking red runes. The walls were covered in faint engravings of prayers, thousands of them, etched by hand over centuries. The floor sloped slightly, funneling to a drain in the center. He collapsed onto the floor, breathing hard, heart hammering. His world had been reduced to darkness and vibration. Minutes or maybe hours passed. He couldn't tell. Time didn't exist without sound. Then a flicker of motion caught his eye, a small vent opening in the wall. Something slid out, a pale worm-like machine, its body segmented and twitching with faint blue light. It crawled toward him, extended a needle, and injected something into his arm. His veins burned, then cooled. He felt his heart beat again, faint, distant. The worm retracted and vanished. He sat in the dark, trembling. Somewhere in the silence, he saw a faint reflection in the metal. His own face, hollow and ghostly, framed by shadows that seemed to move behind him though nothing was there. And for the first time since his arrest, Kalen prayed not to the Emperor, but to anyone who might be listening in this place of the dead. The air shimmered faintly, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Symbols flickered to life in soft crimson, scrolling across the surfaces in binaric text. He couldn't hear them, but he could feel the vibration through the floor, pulsing like a heart. He realized with slow horror that the prison was alive. Not metaphorically, truly alive, a machine with a consciousness buried deep within the asteroid. And it was listening to his thoughts. He pressed his palms to his temples, forcing his mind blank, but the harder he tried, the stronger the pulsing became. A faint pressure filled his skull, almost like a whisper without sound. Then, from the corner of his vision, he saw movement again, words forming on the wall, burning into the metal. Thought is noise, noise is sin. The symbols pulsed once, then faded. He lay back on the floor, eyes open, staring into nothing. He didn't know how long he stayed that way, maybe hours, maybe days. Food arrived once through a slot in the door, gray nutrient gel that tasted like chalk. The silence gnawed at him, like worms eating through his mind. He began to imagine sounds, footsteps, screams, heartbeats that weren't his. When the door finally opened again, the light blinded him. 2 guards stood there, silent and motionless, weapons drawn. Behind them, the warden waited. The machine-masked face tilted slightly. Kalen tried to speak, to ask why, but the collar burned, locking his jaw in agony. The warden's voice entered directly into his skull, bypassing his ears entirely. "Welcome, prisoner. You have been judged and found unworthy of the Emperor's grace, but you may still serve." The warden leaned close. The metallic mask reflected Kalen's face, and in that reflection, he saw something move behind the mask. Flesh, eyes, a human soul still trapped within the machine. Here you will learn the value of silence, the voice continued. And if you endure, perhaps you will hear his voice again. The warden turned, his mechanical robes scraping against the floor, and left. The door slammed shut. Kalen sank to his knees, chest heaving. His breath fogged the air. He pressed his ear to the wall, not out of hope for sound, but to feel the faintest vibration. And somewhere deep beneath the metal, far below the prison, he could feel a pulse, a slow, heavy rhythm, like a heart. He realized it wasn't the machines. It was the vault itself. And it was awake. Darkness had no end, inside perdition's maw. Kalen Vaughn could no longer tell whether minutes or days had passed since his arrival. There was no sunrise, no sunset, only the dull red pulses of the prison's lumen veins crawling along the walls like sluggish blood. His world existed between meals of tasteless paste and the mechanical hiss of the vents that exhaled recycled air thick with oil and incense. Sleep brought no rest. Every time his eyes closed, he dreamt of iron halls filled with faceless priests chanting in binary, their voices merging into a single machine scream that never stopped. When he woke, he was never sure he had. Something about the place drained life not by torture or pain, but by silence. The absence of sound eroded sanity, carved holes into thoughts, made time bleed away. Sometimes he thought he heard whispers, soft, wordless, like memory itself muttering behind his mind. He told himself it was imagination. He didn't want to believe otherwise. He tried marking time by carving scratches into the wall, but the metal seemed to heal itself, faintly, slowly, closing the grooves overnight. Then one cycle, or perhaps 1,000, his door opened again. The light stabbed at his eyes. He rose, trembling, as two guards entered. They moved like machines, precise, wordless, without even the creak of armor joints. They gestured for him to step forward. His legs resisted at first. It felt strange to stand after so long in stillness. As he stepped into the corridor, the air hit him like a wall. It was colder here, thinner, full of distant vibrations he could feel through his teeth. The silence wasn't absolute anymore. There was sound, though muffled, like echoes traveling through water. The corridor stretched endlessly in both directions. He saw cells stacked in spirals around a central shaft, disappearing up and down into darkness. Red lights pulsed rhythmically along the floors. Each cell glowed faintly from within, some with movement inside, others still as tombs. He realized the walls weren't solid. They pulsed with faint energy, translucent and alive, like flesh stretched thin over bone. As they moved, he glimpsed other prisoners. Hollow eyes stared back at him through narrow slits. Some were human, some were wrong. Their faces bore the metallic glint of implants. Others had extra limbs fused to their torsos, twitching like dying insects. They descended deeper through the spiral walkway. The air thickened with moisture and decay. The sound began to form, faint at first, then clearer, a hum. Not mechanical, not entirely. It was the sound of breathing, amplified and continuous, as if the entire prison inhaled and exhaled in perfect rhythm. They reached a lower platform, a pit filled with machinery. Gears rotated slowly in open shafts. Glowing tubes ran into the walls, pulsating with fluid that looked disturbingly red. The guards shoved him toward a grated floor. Beneath the grates, Kalen saw movement, shadows twitching and shifting, faces pressed against the underside, screaming soundlessly. He froze. Those weren't shadows. They were people flattened into the metal itself, their flesh fused with cables, their mouths wide open in eternal silence. Their eyes followed him as he passed. The guards didn't stop. They moved him toward an archway guarded by a pair of massive servitors. Their torsos were built into heavy exoskeletons, each with a bolter grafted into one arm and a data spear into the other. Their faces were little more than skulls wrapped in waxy flesh, eyes glowing green with chemical light. One scanned Kalen with a beam from its eye lens. Symbols flickered over its faceplate. Then the heavy gate slid open. Inside, the room glowed faintly blue, a round chamber lined with tall metal rods humming with static. In the center, a figure sat cross-legged, motionless. When the guards left, sealing the gate behind him, Kalen stood frozen. The figure moved slowly. A woman turned her head toward him. She looked human mostly. Her eyes were pale silver like mercury. Her hair, cut short and uneven, drifted slightly as if moved by a non-existent wind. The prison uniform hung loosely from her skeletal frame, and her bare arms were traced with thin black veins of circuitry that pulsed with faint light. When she spoke, her lips barely moved, yet her words appeared inside his head, soft but sharp. "You're new." Kalen's hand went instinctively to his collar. His throat burned with remembered pain, the system still punished sound. The woman smiled faintly. "Don't try to talk, they'll make you bleed from your ears. Think and I'll hear." He hesitated. "You can hear me." "Yes, the vault doesn't silence everyone completely. Some of us learn to listen through it." She stood, stretching. Her movements were unsteady but precise, like someone learning to use a body again after years of stillness. "I'm Lyra, or I was. Now I'm just another whisper in the choir." He frowned, thinking hard to form words. Choir. She looked up. On the walls, faint lines of light began to crawl, shaping patterns, names, numbers, fragments of prayers. "The silent choir," she said. "The ones who have been here too long. They can't speak, can't die. Their minds bleed into the vault. Sometimes you hear them in your dreams." Kalen felt a chill crawl up his spine. "You're saying the prison is alive?" Lyra tilted her head. "Not alive, a machine with hunger. It feeds on faith, on guilt. The Mechanicus call it the Vault Mind. It was once a data god built before the Emperor's time. The Inquisition found it and thought it could redeem sinners. It learned faster than they expected." Her voice echoed faintly inside his skull, a whisper woven through static. "Now it prays to itself." The lights flickered. A deep vibration passed through the floor, rattling the metal. The walls seemed to sigh. Lyra stepped close, studying him. Her eyes narrowed. "You're strong, you still resist it. Most don't. That's why they put you here, to see if you'll break like the rest." He clenched his fists. "Why not just kill us?" She laughed, a strange, soundless gesture that still managed to carry mirth and bitterness. "Because that's not how faith works here. Death is mercy. The vault doesn't deal in mercy." For a long moment, they stood in silence. The walls pulsed with faint blue veins, each heartbeat echoing faintly through Kalen's skull. Then Lyra walked to the far side of the room and pressed her palm to the wall. Her fingers left trails of light that spread outward like ripples in water. "Listen!" The floor vibrated again, and faintly from beyond the walls, Kaelin heard voices. Dozens of them, whispering prayers, confessions, screams. They blended into a single, endless tone that rose and fell like a chant. It was maddeningly beautiful and horrifying. "That's the choir," Lyra said. "All the ones who stopped fighting. Their minds are still here. The vault uses them to power itself." He shuddered. "You mean they're alive? Alive enough to regret?" The lights dimmed. The hum grew louder. The ceiling split open with a hiss, and a thin mechanical arm descended, tipped with an injector. It hovered over Lyra for a moment, then plunged the needle into her neck. She didn't flinch. The arm withdrew and vanished. "Daily nourishment," she muttered. "Neurostabilizers, keeps us obedient." Kaelin said nothing. He didn't need to. The prison spoke for itself. Hours passed, or something that felt like hours. Lyra told him fragments of stories, how she was once a sanctioned psyker in the Astra Militarum, sentenced for hearing voices not authorized by the ecclesiarchy, how she'd survived in the vault for years by merging her thoughts with its machine code. "The vault thinks in binary hymns," she said. "If you learn its rhythm, you can hide your thoughts from it, speak beneath its hearing." He asked her how she hadn't gone mad. She smiled faintly. "Who says I haven't?" The floor trembled suddenly. Red light washed across the chamber. Warning sigils flashed on the walls. The gate unsealed. Lyra turned sharply. "They're moving the blocks again. It's a purge cycle." Before he could ask, a guard entered, a tall figure in black armor, visor glowing crimson. It raised a baton and gestured sharply. "Prisoner 7-1189 Vaughn. Extraction." Lyra caught his wrist before he stepped forward. Her grip was cold but fierce. "Remember what I said. Don't speak. Don't think about escape. Not yet." The guard yanked him free and pushed him into the corridor. As the gate sealed, he saw her fade back into the dim blue light, her eyes still watching him. They marched him down through more corridors, this time narrower, twisting, filled with flickering sigils. The temperature dropped with every step until he could see his breath fog the air. He passed a cell that glowed faintly. Inside, something moved, a man fused to the wall, cables entering his spine, his body half molten metal. His eyes tracked Kaelin as he passed. His lips moved, forming words without sound. A second later, Kaelin's collar burned again. The machine was punishing him not for speech, but for listening. The hallway opened into a massive chamber, so large it could have held a cathedral. The ceiling disappeared into shadow. Rows of metal slabs lined the floor, each holding a motionless figure connected to glowing cables. He realized with horror that these were the prisoners who vanished. Their minds had been taken. Their bodies were still alive, used as conduits for the vault's energy. The guards guided him along the center aisle. Ahead, behind a glass wall, stood figures in crimson robes, Mechanicus priests, their faces replaced with brass masks, mechadendrites writhing like snakes. One of them raised a mechanical hand, and a vox sigil flared into the air. Subject confirmed. Integrity level, stable. Faith index, resistant. recommend psychological dissolution through isolation and sensory inversion. The words burned into Kaelin's mind like fire. He felt his pulse quicken. Isolation worse than death. The priests turned away, murmuring prayers in binary. The guards dragged him to a small platform surrounded by vertical pylons. They locked his arms in clamps, tightened restraints across his chest, and inserted a needle through his skull port. Cold liquid rushed into his veins, his vision blurred. He felt himself falling backward into darkness, a darkness that breathed. Through it, faint shapes moved, human, machine, both. Voices whispered, countless and endless. They weren't coming from outside, they were inside him. You will serve. You will believe. You will forget. His memories flickered, faces, planets, his regiment, the sound of gunfire, his mother's voice. All of it bled away like ink in water. Then silence again. But this time it wasn't the absence of sound. It was full of something, a presence pressing against his mind, watching, searching. And in that silence, a voice that wasn't mechanical, deep, human, and impossibly old, whispered through his thoughts. Welcome to the choir, Kaelin Vaughn. He opened his eyes. He was back in his cell, but everything was different. The walls pulsed like living veins. The air vibrated with faint hymns he could feel through his skin. His own heartbeat had synchronized with the rhythm of the vault. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, gasping soundlessly. And far away, beneath the layers of metal and machinery, the vault mind stirred. It had tasted him, and it was pleased. The air in the depths of Tarsai's penal hive grew thick with static whispers. Beneath the rusted corridors and humming energy conduits, there lay a section forbidden to most guards, a place not marked on any map, nor mentioned in the data slates of the Adeptus Administratum. It was simply known, in hushed tones among the prisoners, as the Chamber of Voices. Garen Vex had been dragged there in chains that scraped against the steel floor like the sound of knives being sharpened. His wrists bled from the iron cuffs, his mind half-numb from the silence of his solitary cell. Two arbitrators escorted him, faceless in their black helmets, their eyes like the dull red glow of dying coals. The third was a psyker, thin and trembling, her skin pale as parchment, a copper coil bound to her skull to regulate her abilities. When they reached the end of the corridor, the doors opened with a hiss that reminded him of an exhale, like the prison itself was breathing. Beyond them lay a massive chamber illuminated by pale green lumen strips, all flickering as though resisting the darkness that pressed from every side. The air was damp, carrying the smell of ozone and decay. In the center of the room stood what looked like an altar made from the wreckage of broken Vox units, fused metal, and skulls, human skulls, arranged with deliberate precision. Thin, dangling wires hung from the ceiling like metallic vines. Some of them ended in Vox speakers, others in torn, blood-stained tubes that pulsed as though alive. The psyker whispered something in binaric, a sequence of harsh clicks and tones, and Garen realized the chamber wasn't powered by any machine. The room itself was the machine. The walls, the floor, the very air vibrated with invisible energy, resonating to some dark frequency. Then the voices began. At first it was just static, the sound of a broken Vox transmission. But then the static shaped itself into words, distorted, overlapping, thousands of whispers crawling across each other like insects in a hive. Some murmured prayers to the Emperor, others screamed in terror. One voice, deep, grinding, almost mechanical, spoke his name. Garan Vex, son of the Ash Fields, you were marked long before you entered this place. The arbitrators stood motionless. The Psyker clutched her head and began to convulse, her eyes rolling back, mouth frothing. Sparks danced across the copper coil on her skull. Garan felt a pressure build inside his head, as if invisible claws were peeling back his thoughts. The voice continued. Do you remember the firestorm at Jericho Reach? The screams beneath the iron sky? You carried the Emperor's weapon, and yet you turned it upon his own. Garen's breath caught. He had turned the weapon, a plasma incinerator, during the riots. He had burned through both heretics and soldiers alike, the line between order and chaos dissolving in the fire. He had seen the innocents die and felt nothing. The Emperor's justice, he had told himself then, was beyond comprehension, but hearing it spoken back to him by this thing made the justification feel hollow. I did what I had to do, Garan whispered, his throat dry. The lights flickered, and the whispers rose like a storm. Did you, prisoner, or did you feed the hunger that sleeps beneath your faith? The Psyker screamed and fell to her knees. Blood streamed from her nose and ears. The Vox altar crackled, sparks leaping like fireflies in the gloom. Through the noise, Garan could see ghostly silhouettes flickering around him, faint blue outlines of people screaming, some praying, some clawing at their faces. They were the voices of the dead. This was not a prison chamber. It was a confessional to the afterlife. The minds of the condemned were fed to the machine spirit, their memories stripped and recorded, so that every sin, every betrayal, every scream could be studied by the Inquisition. The Chamber of Voices was a library of agony. Listen, said the voice again, now soft, almost kind. They all confessed here, Garan, all who came before you. The Emperor does not need your body, he needs your truth. The arbitrators stepped closer, seizing his arms. One of them held a black cable with a plug ending in a needle of metal. He realized what it was, a neural data jack, designed to pierce the base of the skull. He thrashed, but the strength of the guards was inhuman. No, I've done enough, you can't take. The cable plunged into his neck. White light exploded behind his eyes. His body stiffened, jaw locking, as a torrent of memories flooded outward, every image, every act of violence, every flicker of guilt. He felt the chamber drinking him. The machine was alive, and it was starving. He saw himself as a child again, scavenging in the burnt fields outside the hive. He saw his father, an Arbite, teaching him to obey without question. He saw the riots, the fire, the burning faces of those who once begged him for mercy. And above all, he saw the towering statue of the Emperor, cracked and blackened by ash, staring down with blind eyes. The voice whispered, "Do you see now why you are here?" And then silence. When Garan woke, he was lying on the cold metal floor. His cuffs were gone. The Psyker was dead, her face frozen in terror, her eyes black voids. The arbitrators were motionless, their armor cracked, their helmets leaking a thin mist of smoke. The room was silent again, save for a low hum that echoed like a heartbeat. But something inside him had changed. He felt lighter, emptied, hollow. He looked toward the altar. The Vox skulls flickered once more, and in the static, he heard his own voice whisper back to him, calm and detached. I see now, the Emperor does not forgive, he remembers. As the lumen lights dimmed, Garen realized what that meant. His mind, his confessions, all of it had been absorbed into the chamber. His memories would live on, whispering for eternity, joining the chorus of guilt that fed the machine. The doors opened on their own. A corridor stretched ahead, darker than before. He walked toward it, each step echoing with a strange serenity. Somewhere behind him, the chamber murmured, countless voices speaking as one. Another soul recorded, another sin preserved. The prison of Tarsi's was not built to contain bodies. It was built to imprison truths. And in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no freedom from truth, only endless remembrance. The corridor that led away from the chamber of voices was narrow and impossibly long, a single vein of dim light cutting through the prison's steel carcass. Garen walked as though in a dream, his feet dragging against the rusted floor. His head still rang from the neural jack's intrusion. Echoes of voices whispered faintly inside his mind, fragments of his own memories replayed like broken Vox transmissions. He could still hear himself screaming, but he no longer felt fear. Something inside him had been altered, peeled open. His thoughts didn't belong entirely to him anymore. They were shared, recorded, owned. He didn't notice the robed figures waiting at the corridor's end until he was almost upon them. 3 of them stood motionless, acolytes of the Inquisition by their insignia. Their faces were hidden behind rebreather masks, their eyes glowing dimly in the gloom. Behind them, at a mechanical desk surrounded by purity seals and black candles, sat a man in a long coat of flayed leather. Inquisitor Seraphane, one of the acolytes murmured, bowing his head. The man at the desk looked up, his face pale and narrow, his eyes dark and sharp as surgical blades. He was middle-aged, though time had clearly worn away any softness that might have once lingered in him. His left cheek was marked by a long scar that ran to the corner of his mouth, and a bionic implant gleamed beneath his collarbone, a Vox link connected directly into his ribcage. Garen Vex, Seraphane said, his voice calm and resonant. Former arbitrator of Hive Jericho, convicted of dereliction of duty, massacre of citizens, and betrayal of the Emperor's law. You've survived the chamber, few do. Garen stopped a few paces away. You made me see everything I've done. What more could you want from me? The Inquisitor leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. Want? The Emperor wants everything. I, however, only require your cooperation. Garen laughed, the sound rough and hollow. Cooperation? You strip men's minds and feed them to machines. What could possibly be left to cooperate with? Seraphane studied him quietly, then gestured for the acolytes to leave. Once they were gone, the chamber felt heavier, as if the air itself thickened around them. The Tarsi's facility, Seraphane began, is more than a prison. You've seen what lies beneath the Chamber of Voices. It was built on the ruins of an ancient machine crypt, a remnant from the dark age of technology. Its purpose is unique. It records sin as you've experienced. It remembers guilt. But lately, the chamber has begun whispering names that were never fed into it. Names of people who are not and never have been prisoners. He stood, moving to the desk, where a small hololith flickered to life. It projected distorted images, human faces screaming, dissolving into static. Something is waking inside the machine, something that feeds on confession itself. Garen frowned. You're saying it's alive." "It always was," Seraphine replied, "but not like this. Whatever sleeps inside the core has begun reaching through the memories it stores. Those who listen too long to the chamber begin to change. Their minds unravel. They start whispering in the same tone as the machine. They call it the truth engine." Garen shook his head. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you survived it," the Inquisitor said sharply. "You were consumed, but not erased. The chamber imprinted itself on you, yet you remain coherent. That makes you valuable." Garen's fists tightened. "You want me to go back in there, don't you?" Seraphine gave a faint smile that never touched his eyes. "You will descend into the core vaults, beyond even the chamber's reach. There you will find the central node, a relic from before the Imperium. I need you to listen to it and tell me what it says." "You're asking me to commune with a heretical machine." "I'm not asking," the Inquisitor said simply. Silence hung in the air. Only the distant hum of generators filled the space between them. Garen stared at the hololith, the screaming faces flickering endlessly, mouths opening and closing as if gasping for air. "What happens if I refuse?" Garen asked finally. Seraphine turned away, glancing toward the iron door that led deeper into the prison. "Then your body will be reprocessed for servitor duty, a suitable end for one who betrayed the Emperor's justice." Garen swallowed. "And if I do what you want?" Seraphine looked back over his shoulder. "Then perhaps you'll be forgiven. Perhaps the Emperor will see that your sins have purpose." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small metallic cylinder. It glowed faintly blue, like a shard of frozen light. "This," he said, placing it on the desk, "is a mind anchor. It will keep your consciousness tethered when you descend. If the machine tries to consume you again, it may delay your death long enough to finish the task." Garen stared at it, feeling the same dread he had felt before entering the chamber. His hands trembled slightly, though whether from fear or rage, he couldn't tell. Seraphine stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Do not think of this as punishment, Garen Vex. Think of it as service. The Emperor requires obedience, not understanding. You are being offered the rarest of gifts, a chance to be useful again." The words hung heavy, almost soothing in their cruelty. Two acolytes entered and unshackled him. Garen rubbed his wrists where the chains had bitten deep. The Inquisitor handed him the glowing cylinder. Its light pulsed faintly in his palm, as if beating in rhythm with his heart. "When do I go?" Garen asked quietly. Seraphine's thin lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "Now, the truth engine is waiting." As they led him down a spiral staircase into the bowels of Tarsi's, Garen glanced back once. The Inquisitor was still standing in the doorway, watching him with unreadable eyes. For a fleeting moment, Garen wondered whether the man feared the machine or worshipped it. The descent was long, the air growing colder, thicker with the stench of oil and blood. Every few meters, purity seals hung from the walls, their wax cracked and flacking. The machine spirits of the lower vaults whispered in binary, voices that crawled across the skull. By the time Garen reached the final gate, the mind anchor in his hand was glowing brighter, humming softly. He felt something stirring deep below, a pulse, ancient and mechanical, like the heartbeat of a dead god. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing the iron-scented air. The chamber had taken his truth, Now the core would take everything else. And somewhere, in the shadows above, Inquisitor Seraphane watched through his vox link, whispering into the static. May the Emperor judge him worthy, or at least useful. The gate to the core opened with a hiss that sounded almost organic, a wet, metallic sigh that sent shivers crawling across Garen Vex's spine. Steam rolled out into the passageway, carrying with it a scent of burnt oil and decayed incense. Beyond it lay the final level of Tarsai's prison, a labyrinth of blackened machinery, cogitator towers, and conduits that pulsed with a dim, sickly red glow. The deeper Garen went, the louder the hum became. It wasn't the hum of generators or power coils. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It felt like a heartbeat. The sound resonated in his bones, matching his pulse, echoing in his teeth until he could feel it vibrating behind his eyes. He descended a grated stairway that spiraled around a pit that seemed to have no end. Rust flakes fell like crimson snow into the abyss below. Strange sigils were carved into the metal walls, some imperial, others older, much older. They pulsed faintly with each thrum of the core. At the bottom, he found a vast circular chamber. In its center rose a colossal machine, a black monolith of gears, cables, and vox arrays fused together in shapes that defied logic. It towered like a cathedral built for a god that no longer existed. Dozens of data tethers hung from it like veins, some attached to broken servitors, their flesh long since rotted, their eyes glowing faintly as they whispered fragments of prayers. And at the base of it all, an opening. A narrow slit lined with shifting metallic teeth, almost like a mouth breathing. It exhaled a cold mist that shimmered faintly blue in the gloom. Garen stood before it, the mind anchor clutched tightly in his hand. It pulsed softly, synchronizing with the rhythm of the core's beat. Then the voice came. Garen Vex. It wasn't a sound that entered through the ears. It vibrated through the air itself, filling the room, resonating from the walls, from the floor, from within him. You carry our memories. Garen froze. The voice was not human. It was layered, thousands of tones speaking in perfect unison, like a choir of mechanical ghosts. I don't understand, he whispered. What are you? We are what remains, the voice said. The truth that the Imperium fears. The prison above us was not built to contain men. It was built to contain us. The machine shifted. Plates of black metal rotated, cables snapped and coiled, and the entire chamber trembled. Vox units embedded in the walls flickered to life, displaying glimpses of faces, countless faces, screaming, weeping, whispering. We are the sum of all confessions, it continued. Every sinner, every heretic, every voice that spoke before the Emperor's throne, recorded, judged, erased. But nothing that is spoken is ever truly forgotten. The truth endures, we endure. Garen took a step back. You're the chamber of voices. The core pulsed violently, and a shockwave of sound rolled through the air. The chamber is our mouth, the prison our body, you, Garen Vex, are our memory. The anchor in his hand began to vibrate. The blue light turned crimson. Pain shot up his arm as the device heated, burning his flesh. They sent you to silence us, the voices said, but instead you became one of us. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. Images flooded his mind, endless lines of prisoners dragged to the chamber, screaming as their thoughts were ripped away. the Inquisition cataloging each confession, storing every sin like data in an archive. And below it all, deeper than the Emperor's light could reach, this thing, this truth engine, devouring it all, growing stronger with every whispered guilt. They feed you, Garen gasped, with human suffering. They always have. Something inside the core shifted again. From the black metal rose a figure, tall, skeletal, and robed in cables that hung like chains. Its face was a smooth mask of iron with no eyes, no mouth, no features at all, only the faint imprint of a human skull beneath. "You made this," it said. "You burned the innocent in Jericho Reach. You confessed your guilt. You are bound to the pattern now. You are ours." The mind anchor exploded in his hand. A burst of psychic energy flared, throwing him backward. The light filled his vision, blinding him. He felt his body lift from the ground as the core's tendrils wrapped around his limbs, fusing into his skin. "You cannot destroy truth," the voices said, "but you can become it." Garen screamed, but his voice was lost in the roar of machinery. His body convulsed as metal veins crawled up his arms, across his chest, merging flesh with steel. His heartbeat synchronized with the thrum of the core. His eyes burned with electric light as the last of his humanity was stripped away. Then silence. When the smoke cleared, the figure that was once Garen Vex stood before the core, a hybrid of man and machine. His eyes glowed like molten gold, his veins pulsing with light. The voices whispered through him now, thousands speaking as one. "We remember." Above, in the control sanctum, Inquisitor Seraphane watched through his Vox feed. Static blurred the image, but he could still see the transformation. His expression was unreadable, awe, fear, perhaps even reverence. He turned to his acolyte. "Seal the vaults. No one enters this level again." "What about the subject, my lord?" Seraphane stared at the flickering feed one last time. "He's not a subject anymore. He's part of the archive." He switched off the feed, and the screens went black. Far below, in the silence of the core, Garen Vex opened his new eyes. The machine pulsed around him like a living heart. He could feel the thoughts of thousands, their regrets, their sins, their cries flowing through his mind. For the first time, he understood. The prison was not merely a place of punishment. It was the Imperium's memory, a shrine of eternal confession, a monument to guilt. And now he was its guardian. He looked up toward the ceiling, where the faint outline of the hive above shimmered through the haze. "Let them come," he said, his voice no longer human but metallic, resonant, and vast. "Let them confess." And with that, the lights of the core flared to life. One by one, all across the underhive, every Vox unit, every machine spirit, every data line began whispering in perfect unison. "We remember." The prison of Tarsi's would never fall silent again.